Welcome back to the second topic of this session. If you're joining us now for the first time, just remember that the sessions are pre-recorded, so the presentation will be played back to the audience. And if you have any questions that you want to ask, please use the chat function at the side of your screen. Please type in your questions. And if you want a specific speaker to address your question, please identify the speaker in your questions. Some of our speakers are able to join us because of, are unable to join us because of the time difference. So in that case, we will, forward your questions to the speaker later on after the session has ended, right? So this second topic that we are looking at is on the international quality infrastructure. So there are 5 presentations here. The first presentation will be by Professor Pendrell. Professor Pendrell has a Bachelor's of Science in Physics and a PhD in Atomic Physics from the University of Reading, England. Between 1985 and 2012, Professor Pendrell was the R&D director at the Measurement Technology Division and the Swedish National Metrology Institute of SP at Borås. So from 2006 to 2008, he was an adjunct professor at Uppsala University. He plays a leading role nationally and also internationally, being chair of the IUPAC SUNEMCO from 2005 to 2008. He's also chair of the Euromed from 2009 to 2012 and has been chair of the ISO TC12 quantity of units since 2012. His philosophy is better measurements leads to better products and health. Therefore, he develops new quality assured methods in which man is the main actor. Our second speaker is David Handlen. He's currently the secretary of the IEC Conformity Assessment Board, based in Geneva, Switzerland. David liaises with many international organizations and presents at international events on various topics. David holds a bachelor degree in electrical engineering from the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, and an executive MBA in management of technology from the EPFL in Lausanne, Switzerland. Prior to joining the IEC in 2011, David has 30 years of career span, diverse experience in technical, commercial, and management areas across 3 different continents, mainly in international SME focus on industrial manufacturing, including his own 10 years startup during the 1990s. Our third speaker today is Dr. Martin Milton, the director of the BIPM. So Dr. Martin Milton has a MA in physics from Oxford University in 1981 and a PhD in laser physics from the University of Southampton in 1990, followed by an MBA from the London Business School in 1991. So Dr. Milton joined the BIPM as Director Designate in October 2012 and became the Director of the BIPM on 1st of January 2013. Before he moved to the BIPM, Dr. Milton spent 31 years at the National Physical Laboratory in the United Kingdom, where he was a fellow in the Analytical Science Division. Dr. Milton has published more than 90 papers in peer-reviewed journals and has received numerous several awards, including most recently the Finkelstein Medal of the Institute of Measurement and Control for notable contribution to measurement internationally. And our next speaker is Dr. Roman Schwartz. He is the president of the CIML. Dr. Roman Schwartz is a physicist, and from the year 2014 to 2020, he was the vice president of PDB. He has now since retired, but he's still working for PDB and the OIML, and he's the CIML president since 2017. The next, last but not least, we have Ms. Etty Feller, chair of the ILAC. Etty professional background is in biochemistry and business administration with a major in management. He joined the Israel Laboratory Accreditation Authority in year 2000, and where he was then nominated the CEO in 2011. He has over 20 years of experience in the field of accreditation and assessment. Since 2019, he's the chair of ILAC. Her mission is to promote accreditation by qualified and competent organization in a harmonized way for the benefit of the world. So with that, I will have Benjamin play us the slides for all of you.
Welcome everyone to this presentation about quantities and units in e-health. So, Mike, perhaps you'd like to give a little bit of background about the work we've been doing, the task force, and how we've interacted with various organizations. Is that okay?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you, Leslie. So we created a task force because we saw there were a number of standards development organizations that were involved in similar activities. We have, of course, TC12, who Leslie just introduced himself, and then there was a R group, and we found that there was no acceptable standard for units, quantities and units in healthcare, as broad an industry as that was. We wanted to figure out a way to identify a standard way of identifying quantities and units. So we brought together the two work groups, TC12, which is, I kind of think of them as horizontal, if you will. They're involved in quantities and units across all domains. And our group, which is TC215, is strictly the vertical domain of health informatics. And as I mentioned briefly, you know, in FAIR, if we want reusability, when you collect data for one purpose and you want to reuse it for another purpose, you have to be very sure that people that are using that data understand what they're looking at. And of course, the quantities and units that are being used to describe that data are of utmost importance. And we'll get into it a little bit in this presentation, but if we don't have the same quantities and units, it leads to very unpredictable, and in the healthcare domain, even dangerous situation. So we formed a task force where we got together and we surveyed for the use of quantities and units in healthcare. And we looked at a number of different areas and put together a questionnaire. We had a work group.
You can see they're quite diverse. The United Nations is on board, an organization called SNOMED, initiative called UCOM. We'd like to share with you some of the experiences interacting with them.
And then this group was kind of the drafting committee, if you will. They were responsible for most of the activity that we did.
If you would like a copy of this survey report, it is available, and we're encouraging input
Yes.
feedback to it.
As I made inference to just a few minutes ago, quantities and units are essential for interoperability and safety throughout healthcare. One of the big examples we came up with, and it's a very unique, an area that's unique to healthcare, is in medications. So, you know, if everybody's not using the same quantities and units to describe something, then we're not going to be able to have the interoperability, the data sharing, the data reuse that we're trying to do. And
it says here that this has become acute as information and communication technologies are successfully deployed in eHealth. There's a real need to review those standards that are out there. And presumably this past year, Mike, I can imagine with the pandemic that this has really taken off. Isn't that so?
It has.
Yeah.
And again, you know, being able to share, one of the examples we talk about later is being able to report adverse events. Well, if everybody is not using if everybody's using different standards, what is it you're reporting? So you can't aggregate the data. You can't bring the data together. It's my apples and oranges notion. So yes, we found that to be extremely important. And
so, yeah.
Go ahead.
And our two technical committees have very similar missions, so to say. So if we look at your TC215, Mike,
yes,
your remit.
Yeah, our standardization is a field of health informatics for the coherent and consistent interchange and use of health-related data and the knowledge to support to enable all aspects of the health system. So
Right.
we're all about using the data. And I think about interoperability and, you know, to this group as computability. You know, the idea is that the data that you're dealing with can be used computationally and you can perform operations on it. And that's very important. And then that led us to work with Leslie's group with TC12. And why don't you mention your scope?
Right. So our starting point is, from our point of view, so ISO TC12, quantities and units, the horizontal aspect that Mike refers to. Our main product in TC12 is a series of standards called ISO 80000. An example, Mike, of the standards that your technical committee, 215, is producing. You indeed have a standard, for example, ISO 11240, addressing units of measurement.
Diagram will show. But with IDMP, there was no, in the entire world of healthcare, the manufacturers were using their own names to describe the drugs. So we brought together in TC215, we had 9 regulatory agencies from all over the world, and we, you know, TC215 has 63 countries involved. So we came up with a standard that would uniquely identify medicinal products so that we were all calling it by the same name. So how do you compare medicinal products? How do you compare adverse events when we're all calling it different things?
Right.
So we found this to be very core and very fundamental to our needs. And part of that was the units and measure. And
right.
we created that document that Leslie already mentioned.
So let's take an example from the United Nations, from these international trade examples. On the right-hand side, you can see a standardized packing instruction that the exporter would actually fill in before sending his goods internationally. So I've taken one example, which is a regular physical measurement in space and time of the quantity plane angle. The United Nations then has decided that the common code for that particular quantity is C81. So that's one example of how to produce a code for a unit of measure. In packaging, in this kind of trade, it's not only physical quantities. I've chosen 2 other quantities which perhaps are more relevant to health informatics. One might need to communicate the number of treatments that have been administered. So there's a United Nations code U1 to specify a unit of count. concerning the number of treatments. Similarly, there's a code U2, which is a unit of count when counting tablets of medicine. So you can see it's quite a broad area. SNOMED was another organization, a stake organization, and Mike, I think you've worked together with SNOMED quite a bit. Perhaps
yes, we have. So, and this is an interesting example, if you will, but of what the difference is. The SNOMED is a comprehensive terminology, and it's used throughout the world and throughout healthcare for clinical content. So what it enables consistent representation of the content that's used in medical records, and it's mapped into other standards, and it's used in more than 80 countries. What's interesting about SNOMED is that these concepts are related to one another. So in order to come up, the CT is clinical terminology. So the SNOMED is an evolving product that's always being improved upon by the SNOMED group and the SNOMED community. So what they're doing is they're maintaining those relationships because healthcare is so dynamic and it's always changing.
I was on the website of SNOMED and I found a case study that they had about electronic health records. So,
exactly.
So this is if I understand it correctly, Mike, it's a kind of standardized way of making clinical notes.
Exactly. And describing all of healthcare terminology in the world of healthcare. And of course, an important part of that is having quantities and units that are consistent and being used in the same way.
Right.
And that wasn't covered until we uncovered it.
Okay, great. So I thought I'd just give you some examples of the specific challenges associated with quantities and unit standardization in health informatics. With this app on the smartphone, say we have a patient who we want to determine his body mass index. So it's a regular physical measurement. We measure the height of the person and the weight of the person, and then we can calculate the BMI index. Now, that measurement can then be coded using the UCOM coding, and you can see in the example an extract of that particular measurement, where, for example, the code for BMI unit is kilogram per meter square. I mentioned usability, so how does that come in? Let's take an example which could be a very topical example, where we have a mother at home with her sick daughter. She doesn't want to go to visit the GP, her physician, so she has an interaction over the internet with the physician. But usability is really essential in this situation, because if the system is not usable, there really is a risk that there'll be a missing communication between the patient and the doctor. So everything from dissatisfaction to real risks for health if we don't transmit measurement information about health in a reliable way. So if we look at this, perhaps Mike, you can help me out. If we go back to the work program of your technical committee.
Yeah. So, and this is the core of our work, if you will, is that, we are able to transmit information, communicate it, get it from place to place. But if it's not understood by the people that received it, as Leslie was just describing with his example, it's not of much value. It's not particularly reusable. We focus on an important aspect of this is semantic interoperability, that the quantity, values, and units of measurement are commonly understood in terms of the metrological concepts, the information structures for the data exchange, and most importantly, that we're using controlled vocabularies, that when we describe something in one domain, it's understood in another domain. And the vocabularies and the data sets are structured and defined and maintained. And maintaining in healthcare is very important and very difficult because it needs to be kept up to date. And as we're seeing during this pandemic, the knowledge and the experience is changing all of the time.
Sure.
So we have to be able to take care of that as well.
Okay, so I get we should be rounding off here, but before we do that, just I can just match what Mike said for his technical committee with the ambitions of our technical committee 12 quantities and units. So we're interested in setting up a harmonized system of concepts for quantity. So we can present in a harmonized way quantities, units and symbols and their relations. And thanks to the translatability of those harmonized ways of presenting quantities and their relations, then we're able to promote better interoperability, improved information exchange, more reliable trading, safety of processes and products of all kinds. And obviously there's a big overlap between our horizontal mission and the vertical mission of Mike's TC215. So time to round off, Mike. So we were very happy to be invited by the BIPM workshop to give this presentation of our work specifically in the area of health informatics, quantities and units. And it seems to match very well the ambitions of the task group at the CIPM. Obviously, we see there's an accepted importance of this field of presenting measurements, units of measurement for both print and also in the context of semantic interoperability. We're suggesting a project which would map the SI system to the UCOM platform. And we need to check how complete UCOM is, what elements of the SI might be missing for the health informatics area, and do an initial risk assessment of those gaps. And then we have a couple of actions addressing maintenance. So we need to create, we don't have at present, I think it's true to say, Mike, we don't have a maintenance processor yet.
That's what we're going to do.
Right. And we need also to create a maintenance authority, someone of experts who can check to see that we're on the right route. The more short term, as I said, you're welcome to have a copy of the report of our task force, and we welcome feedback from you. In particular, we are discussing with the organisation of the BIPM workshop to hold a follow-up webinar, perhaps in a month's time or so, where we could have up to perhaps 2 hours to have an open debate and discussion about this topic of quantities and units in e-health. So that's about as much as I had to say. Mike, would you like to round off as well?
Well, no, I thank you for the opportunity to present to this group, and we are looking for feedback and input, and we feel like we've made a big step forward, and the best way to progress that is to coordinate with the other groups that are out there and the liaison as we've been in the past and going forward in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good day to you all. My name is David Hanlon, and I am the Secretary of the IEC Conformity Assessment Board. My presentation is titled Digital Transformation Impact Scenarios on Quality Infrastructure. I hope you find it interesting and thought-provoking. The first thing we need to address for this topic is what is quality infrastructure and what is its purpose. The International Network of Quality Infrastructure, or INETQI, defines quality infrastructure as indicated on the screen. The purpose of a national quality infrastructure is to achieve a certain number of specific national goals. Those goals may include safety for citizens, energy performance, protection of the environment, protection of critical infrastructure, fair trade, and so on. Other goals are often economic, for example, to improve domestic manufacturing quality and facilitate exports. The entire national quality infrastructure, or QI, flows down from these goals. This is the top level of any quality infrastructure. To achieve these national goals, a national policy framework and organization needs to be established, which is ideally risk-based. The national goals need to be prioritized to ensure the best use of the available national resources. The policy framework will put in place mechanisms to encourage good behavior that leads towards the goals, and will put in place mechanisms to penalize behavior that leads away from the national goals. For example, incentive programs and regulations. The persuasive and dissuasive mechanisms will be based on requirements to be achieved. Those requirements will most often be expressed in standards. So the national quality infrastructure will need the capability to either develop its own standards, or will need the capability to be able to select standards from elsewhere, such as international standards. Since the requirements in standards will usually involve some form of measurable limits, having an appropriate national metrological capability is a key element. The next critical element is the national quality infrastructure, is the capacity to do the checking of products, goods, and services against the requirements in the standards. This is the capacity to assess conformity to the requirements. This is conformity assessment. The national policy for conformity assessment may include pre-market conformity assessment and post-market conformity assessment. The pre-market policies may integrate first-party CA, where suppliers declare conformity to the standards. This is typically used for low-risk products, goods, and services. As the risk of products, goods, or services increase, this is where third-party CA, such as certification, may be required as a policy mechanism. Within the third-party CA policy mechanism, there will be testing laboratories, inspection bodies, auditing bodies, and certification bodies that will check the products, goods, and services against the national requirements. These are the checkers. However, to ensure that the checkers are competent, national accreditation will often be used to check the checkers. The same is true for the equipment used to do measurements. The measurement equipment needs to be calibrated, and a system of checking that the calibration is performed correctly is also critical. The national policy will also often use international global CA schemes as part of the pre-market third-party CA strategy. This is a good strategy because international global CA schemes, such as those operated by IEC, are highly reputable and free of cost for the national QI. So it is a good use of national resources. The national policy will also often have a post-market strategy using third-party CA service providers to check products, goods, and services that are already on the national market. So from a national goals perspective, the national goals drive the national QI strategy. Then to implement the national QI strategy requires a national QI implementation, which achieves the national QI goals, thus closing the circle. Within the national QI implementation, there are three key elements of standards, metrology, and conformity assessment, and an ancillary element of ensuring that the third-party conformity assessment is competent. From a manufacturer's perspective, national quality infrastructure is all about how they can qualify their products for the national market. Market access is their key focus. They must design their products according to the national requirements, which are usually given in national standards, which are often international standards that have been adopted nationally. They must ensure themselves that their products are conformant with the standards, and they therefore do their own first-party conformity assessment. Then, before entering the market, and in fact to achieve market access, their products may also have to be certified using third-party conformity assessment. Once on the market, their products may also be checked again as part of market surveillance activities of the National Quality Infrastructure implementation. Now we need to address what we understand digital transformation to mean. There are a number of different descriptions or definitions that can be found on the web. Here is one from IC Strategic Group 12. Digital transformation is all about data as a driver for future growth. Data is one of the most significant transformative factors, creating a means of increasing transparency as a source of innovation and providing the ability to understand, optimize, and personalize. The ability to harness a wide range of large, constantly evolving, and highly personalized data sets is a strong driver for productivity and supports the creation of new high-value services. Digital transformation is all about being increasingly connected. Access to communication has fundamentally transformed economies worldwide, impacted almost every aspect of society, and created enormous value. Future AAL, or active assisted living systems for the elderly, will use home devices and wearables to monitor and communicate health and activity data to an AAL service provider. The AAL service provider will receive data and transform it into information, which will be communicated to health services such as a doctor or hospital, which may then prescribe medications and thus communicate with a pharmacy. And of course, information may be communicated to family members and so on. External service providers will also ensure the correct functioning of the remote devices used by the elderly, provide remote updates and patch management, and so on. Digital transformation is all about increasing complexity. The complexity of systems is driven by the demands to improve efficiency and effectiveness, to drive productivity, and to adapt to changing consumer demands. Multi-directional energy flow from prosumers contributing to smart grids supports the use of renewable energy sources in national grids and supports important future capabilities such as meaningful demand-side energy management. But it takes the traditional unidirectional network model into a complex new direction. This creates significant new technical challenges, the need for data interchange between multiple stakeholders, and the need to assure correct operation in a wide range of new situations. Digital transformation is all about high-speed automated decisions. In the example of networked and autonomous vehicles, humans will relinquish decision-making and control to smart networked systems that are in constant communication with other vehicles around them, that never get distracted by others in the vehicle, or by the radio, or by a mobile phone, and so on, that never get tired or sleepy, and that can take much faster coordinated decisions than is possible by humans. So now that we have a good understanding of what quality infrastructure is and some idea of the potential impacts of digital transformation, we can begin to investigate what effects digital transformation may bring to quality infrastructure. Admittedly, this is somewhat an activity of gazing into a crystal ball. As we've seen, the three main elements of quality infrastructure quality infrastructure implementation are standards, metrology, and conformity assessment. So we will primarily look at these three elements. For standards, the effect of digital transformation has already been ongoing for some time. Some 25 years ago, standards only existed in paper form and were delivered in paper envelopes by physical postal services. Then came digital paper in the form of PDF files, which were sent on CDs in paper envelopes. Then came the internet, and PDFs were sent by email or downloaded from appropriate websites. Today, standards are available directly on handheld devices, and tomorrow, machines will read standards directly themselves. In the past, IEC standards were available in English, French, and Russian. Today, they are available in English. Soon, they will be available in XML and in other machine-readable languages. In the past, only entire paper standards could be obtained. Then entire standards in electronic paper form, meaning in PDF format. What's coming is the possibility to obtain selected parts of standards, a sort of do-it-yourself standard. Then there will be machine-readable standards that may read micro parts of standards in microseconds with real-time access. The way standards are developed is also changing. In the past, it was primarily people together in rooms discussing and writing standards. Certainly in the last 12 months, this has been completely replaced by web-based meetings. Then, with the advent of machine-readable standards, could the future, at least for some standards, be machines writing standards? And similarly, while most customers for standards is and has been people in companies developing products and services, could future customers be machines developing products and services? With machine-readable standards, will machines develop conformant products and services autonomously? Is the future, therefore, machines developing machines? All of this also has an effect on the business model for standards, which began with a pay-per-standard model. This has been supplemented by a pay-per-part of standard and a pay-per-view. Pay-per-click will follow, and possibly pay-per-microsecond in machine-to-machine exchanges. All of these changes and possible future changes to standards are not straight-line trends, but will branch out and run as parallel options and facilities. We can expect similar effects on conformity assessment. As an example, just in the last year, the CA industry has adapted to accept surveillance assessments by webcam. But taking the example of traditional product conformity assessment, products are developed and manufactured by humans and machines together. The product is tested by a human in a lab. The test lab is assessed by humans for capability, competency, processes, calibration, and so on. Test reports and certificates are issued in an online database and often as a paper copy. And now, looking into the crystal ball, in the future, the product is tested in a laboratory by a CA machine that reads the requirements in the standard. The CA machine is assessed for capability, calibration, and so on. The CA machine records machine-readable test data directly into an online database. A test report or certificate for humans may or may not be created. Scenario 3 is the same as scenario 2, except that now the products are manufactured autonomously by manufacturing machines that are reading standards. Also, the CA machine can be located anywhere and not necessarily in a laboratory. As long as the CA machine is qualified, it can be anywhere. In scenario 4, we have manufacturing machines that also have the CA machine's functions integrated into them. This combined manufacturing CA machine reads standards, manufactures products, and performs conformity assessment. This is possible so long as the qualification and calibration of all the functions are appropriate. In this way, every product coming off the product line is intrinsically conformant with the standard. In scenario 5, we have machines and systems that are self-learning. They are artificial intelligence entities that are constantly changing and improving. Their rate of change and improvement is much too fast for humans to assess, so other AI entities do continuous assessment. If such scenarios do one day become reality, this means that future manufacturing machines and CA machines and combined manufacturing and CA machines will be able to self-calibrate and maintain metrological records. A current influence of the digital transformation on metrology is the move towards the digital upgrade of QI for legal metrology, the use of digital calibration certificates, and certainly the metrology cloud. Again, one of the important effects of digital transformation is the use and power of data. Of course, for many, the idea of self-calibrating machines may seem far-fetched, but the seeds have already been sown. By no longer relying on metrological artifacts, and with the move to defining all measurement units in terms of fundamental constants of nature. Although today a laboratory is needed to create the conditions for an appropriate calibration, for some units, who can predict what the situation will be in 50 years? As a final comment, there are at least 3 layers for consideration when considering the potential impact of digital transformation. These are technical, political, and ethical. There are many things that are technically possible, but that can be very disruptive and that require political will to endorse or to oppose. And the question should always be asked whether such disruption is ethical and productive. There are those who see digital transformation as dehumanizing technology, where humans are removed from most communications, where humans relinquish decision-making and control in ever-increasing situations, and where artificial intelligence will come to dominate as a new species on planet Earth. And there are those who see digital transformation as putting people first, as leveling the playing field, and enabling equal participation, providing high-quality, value-adding services and empowerment. Every new technology is a double-edged sword with the potential to do good or harm. Thank you for your attention.
I'm Martin Milton. I'm the director of the BIPM, the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, and I'd like to talk to you about comparable measurements for a digital world, and in particular, the work that's going on in the BIPM laboratories and with the BIPM coordination services to support the digitization of metrology. I start by reminding everybody about the SI. This is the agreed basis for everything that we do in measurements. Every measurement that we express can be expressed in terms of the agreed international system, the SI. But the point for us today is that the SI has been a dynamic, a moving system that has developed in response to needs for new applications or when new technologies become available. Indeed, most recently, in 2018, the General Conference agreed the revolutionary new definitions for 4 of the base units based on references to fundamental constants. In parallel with the development of the SI, the work within the BIPM work program, within the BIPM laboratories, has also developed. We took on board the need for measurements of ionizing radiation, for computing the world timescale, to become involved in chemical measurements, to become involved in capacity building, and perhaps at the General Conference in 2022, there will be further discussions about how we can become involved in supporting the digitisation of world metrology. So how can the work of the BIPM laboratories and the BIPM databases support the development of new digital NMIs? So we're here in this workshop discussing the initiative by the CIPM to provide and to work towards a digital SI framework. This has been pioneered by a task group within the SI who are aiming to enable SI-based digital communication in industry, to support the digital science and open science paradigms, and to get metrological services ready in the long term for artificial intelligence. At the center of this digital transformation activity, these digital transformation objectives, is the goal of making documents and data within our SI measurement system fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. Now, when we dig a little into what this FAIR means, we can look at the first two, the findable, accessible, in terms of being the motivation to provide data in a way that is automatically readable by computers, that it should be machine readable. The second two, the I and the R, the interoperable and the reusable, these move us towards providing data that should be not only machine readable, but also machine actionable. What I'm going to talk about now is some of the projects that we have in place that we've already started and beginning to plan to make available data from the BIPM laboratories and data from our coordination services and from the SI brochure, machine readable. Let me start by coming to the key comparison database. The key comparison database is, I think, the largest resource of data that we have, that we make available as part of our activities. It has more than 1,600 key comparisons in there and more than 25,000 calibration and measurement capabilities. And indeed, this is data that belongs to, that is shared, that is developed by the organizations that participate in the CIPM MRA, and that's at present, there are now more than 260 institutes doing that. Last October, we started our first project to provide machine readable access to the key comparison database. So what does that mean? Well, since its foundation, the key comparison database has been a website. We updated it over the last couple of years to the KCDB2 format, as we call it, which enables the website not only to present the data, but also to be controlling the workflows within the regions and within technical committees by which the data is approved and entered into the KCDB. But now we're starting to look at machine readable access to this data, and this takes us all to a new level. So what this means is that a client computer can send an inquiry to the so-called API, the Application Programming Interface, and receive as a response from the KCDB client a response including information in an agreed format about one or even all of the CMCs available. This information is simply the information that is already available through the web interface. There's no extra information, there's no issue of confidentiality here. But the key thing is it's made available in a way that a machine, a computer, can interrogate the key comparison database and receive back the data in a format that it itself can work on. The second digital transformation project that we initiated last October with approval from the CIPM was the development for the first time of a version of the SI brochure in XML format. Of course, recent editions of the SI brochure have been disseminated in PDF format. That's an electronic format, if you like. But that is a human readable format rather than specifically a machine readable format. So we've started the work to develop a version of the 9th edition, exactly the same as the current one, but in the XML format. This XML version can be converted into different formats, such as HTML or to PDF again, by middleware that can be programmed to exactly replicate the data in the SI brochure into different formats. In a next step, we will be putting in place unique identifiers, that, such as digital object identifiers, the DOI, to key information within the SI brochure. So, for example, the definitions of each of the base units or the definitions of the derived units could be identified with a DOI, a digital object identifier, so that when authors are writing about the SI units, they can provide a specific reference to an address that has at it the correct definition, the correct reference definition of the relevant unit. So this takes the SI brochure to a new level in terms of being a digital reference document that is both human and machine readable. But the benefits go further than that. The SI brochure, of course, has within it the 7 mise en pratique for the base units. These mise en pratique have within them a significant amount of very important data that's been approved by the consultative committees and by the CIPM as being the basis for the realization of the units. Let me give an example of how this data could be provided in a machine readable form to provide new opportunities for NMIs to provide a digital traceability. In the case of this example I've got here, we're talking about a digital traceability to the metre. So the traceability to the metre, on one side, of course, is based on the definition agreed by the General Conference, by the CIPM, and that you see printed in the PDF version of the SI brochure. But in more detail, to access the exact definition of the metre, it's necessary to access the mise en pratique and the long table in there of the agreed wavelengths with their agreed uncertainties, and actually similarly for the frequencies and the frequency uncertainties that have been agreed by the CCL and the CCTF. This is all part of the SI brochure in principle. So if an application programming interface can be put in place, and this is something we're starting to consider and that I think the CCL will consider when they meet later this year. If an API can be put in place that can access this data, then calibration systems like the 3 indicated in this diagram, each containing lasers operating at different wavelengths. Those calibration systems can directly access the agreed, updated reference wavelength information every time they're used or every time they're rebooted. So in this way, the dissemination of length measurements on the agreed wavelengths agreed by the CCL can make direct reference to the values for those wavelengths and indeed the heritage of those values when they were first agreed, indeed if they superseded previous values. The latest values can be put in place and implemented in calibration reference laser systems anytime through digital access through the API. So that's something that will be discussed by the CCL later this year. So I've talked there about 2 digital transformation projects, both of which are now at the beta testing stage, and we expect to launch in full shortly after this workshop. But our plans go further than that. Probably another one of the very large repositories of data that we hold is in the BIPM time department database. The BIPM time department, of course, is responsible for the monthly and weekly computation of Universal Coordinated Time, UTC, and we disseminate that through the publication on a monthly basis of Circular T and on a weekly basis of Rapid UTC. That computation is based on a huge amount of data from the network of atomic clocks and from all the information on the global navigation satellite systems and the information from the accuracy and performance of the time transfer links. All of that data is within the BIPM time department and is placed within the time department database. That database can be accessed at present through an FTP server, which many of the UTC labs use to access the specific information. There's also a lot of information in there that's available through the web interface. But we've started work now towards putting in place an automatic interface, an API interface, to enable access to that data. This API interface, as we develop its scope, has the potential to open opportunities for a number of exciting new uses of UTC time, and also a potential for a number of new services amongst NMIs. So, for example, the automatic access to UTC can enable automatic monitoring of UTCK, that's the timescale in place in each of the UTC labs. It could enable that information to be displayed in real time on NMI websites. It can enable the automatic steering of UTC to respond to the latest computation of UTC itself. Realizations of UTCK can be steered automatically by reference in real time to the most recent published values in Circular T and of Rapid UTC. Additionally, it can be used by GNSS operators, and we know there's one published example of this, who are able to access the computed values of UTC in real time through an interface in order to monitor the performance of the satellite system. These are just 3 examples. But I believe in discussion with our time department that there's going to be some interesting discussions at the CCTF when it meets shortly after this workshop about the scope for more digital access to the time data held within the BIPM time department. It's not only length and time where our laboratories have data that can benefit and can lead to new applications if it's made available in new ways. Another example is our plans to put together a global database system for carbon dioxide measurements. At present, of course, we carry out a key comparison, BIPM QMK5, which provides the reference or the basis for the reference values for measurements of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere at the ambient levels. And underpins the performance of NMI standards. But behind that data is a lot of data in our laboratories about how the key comparison reference value was developed, because in this case it's developed by an independent absolute method. That data can usefully be put into a database system, and automatic access can be provided so that users of this system can have greater access and be provided with greater transparency as to what is the basis for the greenhouse gas measurement scale that's disseminated by the NMIs. So I've talked about a number of projects that are underway. I've talked about the key comparison database automatic access project. We've just launched another one for the JCTLM, that's the Joint Committee for Traceability in Laboratory Medicine database, which will be underway later this year. I've talked about the plans for the time department database. In each of these cases, our objective is to provide automated API access to this data so that use cases that provide real-time validation of traceability and the scope of recognition needed for digital calibration certificates can be provided. The other big project for us is the production of the machine-readable version of the SI brochure. I talked a little bit about that. I've not had time in this talk to talk about the work that's going on towards the development of a machine-readable version of the VIM, our international vocabulary for metrology. This work is going on and it's already accessible from our BIPM website. These XML versions can provide the authoritative reference data that defines the SI and how to use it. Beyond these projects, there are other projects that I know we'll be discussing with the CIPM when we next have an opportunity. And perhaps the biggest of those is the ambition to be able to provide findable and accessible data that underpins key comparisons and underpins our publications, perhaps by enhancing the scope and usability of the IMRR, the International Metrology Resource Registry that we already host. So how can we at BIPM support digital NMIs? I think we can do that by supporting open data practices like the FAIR that's been discussed in this meeting, by implementing new digital formats for metrology data and metrology publications, and by providing machine accessible data and reference information. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, whatever fits to your time zone. In my presentation today, I will take up what I briefly introduced already yesterday. So today's talk will be about the digital transformation of legal metrology processes. Let me start with a short explanation of what legal metrology is. Legal metrology is the legal framework set by governments and regulatory bodies of a country or economy to create confidence in official and commercial measurements and transactions. Thus, legal metrology serves to protect the citizen and to ensure fair competition in trade. These goals are achieved through legal and technical regulations, conformity assessment, and regular supervision of measuring instruments by accredited or otherwise authorized bodies. For legal metrology, the digital transformation is a real challenge. I've shown this slide already yesterday, but would like to present it here again in order to explain in more detail the various processes and legal metrology steps during the life cycle of a product. The life cycle of a product, the measuring instrument, begins with the manufacturer, who is responsible for the product design and the production line, where a third party takes care of the conformity assessment steps, comprising type examination and the surveillance of the quality system for the production. These two steps, accompanied by market surveillance activities, guarantee that the products which are placed on the market are in conformity to the approved and certified type. These activities are often designated as pre-market activities. Once the customer has bought the product and has put it into use, he will be responsible for the proper installation and use, and has to take care that a verification body performs the verification and regular re-verification. These activities are designated as post-market activities. In addition, the instrument usually also requires regular maintenance, eventually repair, and also software updates. For the sake of completeness, I would like to mention again that in some countries and regions, market surveillance is also considered as a post-market activity. Looking at the various processes during the life cycle of a product, it becomes obvious that the digital transformation of these processes can only be successful and effective if it is based on the exchange of fair digital data, where the emphasis is on the I, that means the interoperability of digital data and processes. Here I would like to present a more detailed view on how a fully digitalized life cycle of a network instrument could look like in the future. The picture here focuses on the various legal metrology activities, but it can equally be applied to other metrological activities such as calibration. The blue circle shall represent the Internet of Things, where all relevant data are stored in a secure cloud. The box in the middle shall represent the smart measuring instrument and its digital representation. I shall provide a more detailed explanation of the concept of a digital representation on the next slide, but would like to mention here already that it is understood as a representation of the physical instrument which contains not all, but the relevant data of an individual instrument throughout its lifetime. The life cycle starts again with the manufacturer, who is responsible for the production of the measuring instrument, its remote control and remote maintenance, as well as the continuous analysis of incoming data. The smart measuring instrument is marked electronically, for example with a digital plate, which forms part of the data stored in the digital representation. The certification body or other responsible authority takes care of either peer assessment or accreditation of the manufacturer, the supervision of the manufacturer's quality system for the production, the conformity assessment of a new type of measuring instrument, which could be done remotely in the future, where the respective certificate and related test report, etc., can be stored electronically, for example by a digital certificate of conformity, which is again stored in the digital representation. Provided that a test laboratory has successfully performed a test, maybe a more test, and issued an electronic or digital test report to be used by the certification body. The Market Surveillance Authority will perform a remote supervision and ensure remotely conformity to type. The initial verification and periodic re-verifications, as well as sampling inspections and other activities of the inspection bodies and verification authorities, will also be done remotely, where an electronic or digital mark is stored in the digital representation of the instrument. We can expect that in the future, certainly after a transition period, all the information in the red boxes, that means the software information stored in the digital representation, will completely replace the traditional way of hardware marking verified instruments. Of course, the customer is responsible for the proper use according to the specifications of the manufacturer and the legal requirements. Last but not least, the accreditation bodies are responsible for the accreditations of the manufacturers and other stakeholders involved, for example, certification body and test laboratories. To be very clear, this is a vision and not yet reality, but many colleagues are working hard to make this vision become reality in the not so distant future. Before I'm going to give some examples of where the digital transformation process has already started, I would like to repeat what I have said yesterday already. The digital transformation of legal metrology processes, and I would add of all metrological processes, can only be successful and effective if it is based on the exchange of fair digital data, where the emphasis is on the I, that means the interoperability of data and processes. As announced already, here are some more details about the concept of a digital representation in metrology processes. For legal metrology purposes, digital representations contain all relevant information that the responsible bodies need to perform the conformity assessment, the verification, market surveillance in a machine-readable way. Digital representations also know the relevant standards and regulations, and provide machine-readable information about it. They also contain all relevant information for customers to gain trust and confidence in the products and quality measures. They provide machine-readable interfaces for users and manufacturers to enable smart quality assurance, and combine machine-readable documents and certificates, hence enable automation of digital quality infrastructure processes. Very importantly, they are secured and validated to provide access to information only to eligible parties. The Digital Certificate of Conformity Methodology, the DCOCM, is my first example of where the digital transformation process has already started. It is a project that PTB has recently started in cooperation with the weighing industry. The idea is that the DCOCM forms part of the digital representation of a measuring instrument under legal control, for example, a weighing instrument, where it contains the type evaluation certificates, the certificates of supervised manufacturers' quality systems for the production, and other relevant documents, and provides the legally prescribed information as machine-readable data, for example, digital data plate, digital test report, digital verification mark, etc., to enable stakeholders to perform all legally prescribed actions. This will require a holistic approach to address the needs of all stakeholders involved during the life cycle of an instrument. All this is intended to be realized using fair digital data based on the SI. The other example of where the digital transformation process has already started is the Metrology Cloud project, also initiated by the PTB. It is kind of a prototype of a European platform for the digital transformation of legal metrology processes. The objective is an easy but secure remote access to the relevant digital data by all players involved, where the players are manufacturers, conformity assessment bodies, verification bodies, and users. Let me use the example of a software update to illustrate how the process is intended to work. In step 1, the manufacturer has developed a software update, which is to be uploaded into the digital representation stored in the secure Metrology Cloud. In step 2, the manufacturer informs the responsible conformity assessment body who evaluates the update. In step 3, the user will be informed about the update and its successful evaluation. If the user accepts the update in whatever way he prefers, the update will be installed in the measuring instrument. Finally, in step 4, the responsible verification body is informed and tasked to re-verify the measuring instrument. After the successful re-verification, a new digital verification mark is stored in the digital representation of the instrument. What is the current status of the Metrology Cloud project? So the Metrology Cloud test network is being set up, where the partners currently are the PTB in Germany, the Czech Metrological Institute in the Czech Republic, and the Sartorius company as industry partner. New partners are welcome. Information is provided under the given link to the Metrology Cloud project. The architecture of the Metrology Cloud has been published, for example, in the April 2020 edition of the OML Bulletin. The digital interface to German verification bodies is currently under construction, and a first real use case with industry has recently started, and future spin-off projects are planned. Finally, let me briefly present how the OML reacts on these exciting developments and how OML contributes to the digital transformation process. Firstly, I'd like to mention the development of internationally harmonized general requirements for software-controlled measuring instruments published in OML document D31. An updated revision has been published 2 years ago, and the responsible project group is already working on the next revision to accommodate current trends in legal metrology, such as machine learning, remote verification, and new operating systems. For example, to enable future remote verifications, the responsible project group currently investigates whether devices' responses using a physical copy or a digital representation are comparable. As another example, the next edition of OML D31 will include aspects of secure access to legally relevant data, protection of transmitted data, and authentication of the parties involved. The OML, in cooperation with partners from member states, also organizes or supports respective workshops. For instance, a workshop on the digital transformation in legal metrology. This workshop was originally planned to be held in Berlin last year, but had to be postponed because of the pandemic. The joint OML PTB WELMEC workshop will now take place as a one-day webinar on the 5th of May this year. It will address current challenges, opportunities, and solutions regarding digitalization in legal metrology, and is especially intended to provide a platform for the exchange of new strategies and concepts. For more information or registration, I refer to the given link on the OML website. Finally, I'd like to mention OML's cooperation in the field of digitalization with other international organizations, notably the BIPM. Last year, a new joint task group has been established after approval by the respective international committees, namely the CIPM and the CIML. The major aims of the joint task group are to foster enhanced cooperation between the BIPM and the OML in order to facilitate both organizations in serving the member states better, and to speak with one single voice for metrology. The major strategic objective of the joint task group is to develop and promote a common vision and a common holistic concept of metrology as a key element for the active promotion of the quality infrastructure concept. The action plan includes, for example, the joint promotion and support of the digital transformation of metrology. With this, I want to conclude and summarize my presentation as follows. The digital transformation of legal metrology processes, but I could say of all metrology processes as well, requires a holistic approach and a close cooperation of all stakeholders. The OML supports a digital transformation of metrological processes that fits to the natural life cycle of smart measuring instruments and systems. Data formats for digital representations should be fair, should be based on the SI, and should be complete. That means should include all relevant information that is necessary to perform any kind of metrological activity by the relevant bodies. The OML contributes to the digital transformation process by providing internationally harmonized software requirements, organizing and supporting respective international and regional workshops, and cooperating with other international organizations in the field of quality infrastructure, notably the BIPM, ISO IEC, and ILAC-IRF. With this, I thank you for your attention. If there are any questions, I'm certainly ready to take and answer them in the Q&A session. And thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure and privilege to give you a short presentation on behalf of ILAC. Accreditation, International Quality Infrastructure in Practice. I'm Eti Feller and I'm the ILAC chair. The main topics in the presentation will be the ILAC MRA, how it works, the assessment system, reality, risks, challenges and opportunities, and some publications. The ILAC MRA in summary. ILAC MRA in summary means that 102 ILAC MRA signatories, which are accreditation bodies. We as signatories accredit more than 80,000 accredited laboratory, 12,200 accredited of inspection bodies, 560 accredited proficiency testing providers, and last but not least, 200 accredited reference material producers. All of us are eligible to use the ILAC MRA mark according to an agreement between ILAC and the signatories and CAPS. So how it works? The ILAC MLA MRAs of a region that recognize is eligible to use the ILAC arrangement, the ILAC MRA. Currently, the MLA MRAs of 5 out of 6 regions cooperation bodies, AFRAC, APAC, ARAC, EA, and IAAC are recognized by ILAC. Recognition of a region is achieved after a successful peer evaluation by ILAC every 4 years. Signatories to the region's cooperation bodies are also members of ILAC and entitled to become signatory full members of the ILAC MRA. All of us can use the ILAC mark. ABs, all the ABs as signatories to the ILAC MRA work according to ISO IC 17011-2017. The definition of assessment technique, method used by an accreditation body to perform an assessment. Process undertaken by an accreditation body to determine the competence of conformity assessment body based on standards and or other normative documents and for the defined scope of accreditation. So this is the process that each one of us have to follow and to make sure that we work according to the standard. The updated ISO IC 17011-2017 also defined several assessment techniques. Assessment technique can include but are not limited to on-site assessment, the traditional way that all of us around the world are familiar with. Remote assessment, which for the last year became more and more preferable by ABs and CAPS. Witnessing, documentation review, file review, measurement audit, review of performance in proficiency testing and other inter-laboratory comparison, validation audit, unannounced visit, and interviewing. Some of, if not all of them, can be done remotely, and digitalization is part of our life for the last year in each one of them. In the next couple of slides, I would like to express our views, to share our views about the situation that all of us are part of it and how digitalization affects our life. The next slides will be about reality, risks, challenges, and opportunities. Reality. The reality indicated the need to be prepared for systematic changes because of global issues. We have to address the fourth industrial revolution and to contribute to the society. The accreditation services are changing and have to be more open-minded. The process and information are shared in more secure way, not only via mail. And we have data security issues these days, and data from organization and kept from for long-term use. The risks that we face and we have to take into consideration is the changes to the model of the way we work, changes to the model that work, and how it affects the outcome, access to advanced method, remote method, and to make sure that we use an appropriate system, a validated system. Also changes to the process recognized by the regulators and stakeholders. Remote assessment is a challenge to regulators and some of our stakeholders since they believe only in the traditional way. And last but not least, confidentiality and all what we know as penetration tests and other issues that relate to confidentiality in our digitalization work. So the challenges. The time to implement new technology is very short. In some cases, we had to do it in a couple of weeks or couple of months. We have to make sure that employment skills are adequate. Information load. We have to think or rethink, do the AB need all the information that we have had till now? We have to look again and to make the best use of the data that we get from ABs and to make sure that it's relevant to the use. AI has a potential to evaluate our decision, and some system already challenge our way of getting to a decision. And the question is whether we are ready that artificial intelligence will be part and will take decision according to our outcome from assessments. And it means that changes to the conformity assessment, the product can be provided differently, and ABs must have the competence assessor, which is a challenge, especially because this issue is new in some countries. In other, we already work remotely and with experts in IT and AI. Depends on the needs of the country, the regulators, and some stakeholders. So, having said all these issues, the reality that we live in, the risks and the challenges, I think that we have to take a look at the opportunities. It will help us to give an effective service to everyone, to our CAPs, to the regulators, to the stakeholders. The decision-making process might be shorter. We have to look in the box or out of the box and maybe to implement some startup organization work. We have to take a look again on the data that we collect from previous assessment and to work out whether we have to repeat and what we have to repeat, if at all. And to make sure that we at least think and learn and train ourselves in artificial intelligence that might improve analysis of, at least improve analysis of our assessments. ILAC publication for your use, all the guidelines and policy documents, although all of us around the world had a challenging year, some documents were updated. Especially, I want to make sure that everyone in this audience knows about ILAC P10 from last July and ILAC P14 from last September. P10 ILAC policy on metrology traceability of measurement results. P14 ILAC policy for measurement uncertainty and calibration. And please take a look at the transition period. For most of them is 1 year or a little bit more. And the fact sheet, we have a specifying accreditation for COVID-19 testing that was published on August 2020 in order to give our signatories and CAPS, regulators and stakeholders support from accreditation to the current pandemic that we are all affected by. Here is the list of source of further information for your review. We will be happy to get your feedback, and if you need any more information, please don't hesitate to contact us. And with that, I want to thank you, and we'll be happy to answer any questions or anything else that you think that I can answer. Take care and stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So we heard we heard 5 very interesting talks from. We're getting some echo. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. So we just heard 5 very interesting talks from the ISO stakeholder organization, sorry, the International Quality Infrastructure Stakeholder Organization, ISO and IEC, OIML, ILAC, BIPM, right? And I think from the presentation, we heard some very interesting challenges, some perhaps driven by the needs of the situation like the pandemic. In some other instances, it's also a vision of how the international quality infrastructure organizations are responding to the rapidly digitalizing world. We heard of some visions of machine doing the work that human beings are doing, and because of that, I think our community would have to transform the services that we have. We have to digitalize our services. That I think that's the first step. But I think at the same time, there are also new kind of requirement and services that are required because of the new digitalized world that we are living in, that is quite different from the physical world. So, okay, so we are very pleased that today we have 5 panelists joining us in this discussion. So I would like to have this throw this opportunity for our panelists to introduce themselves. So maybe we can start from Chris.
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Chris Aegis. I'm representing David Hanlon today, who is Geneva based. I have a background in electrical engineering with a focus on compliance and conformity assessment. And I work with the IEC, and my role with the IEC is as the Executive Secretary for the 2 of the IEC conformity assessment systems, the IECEX and the IECQ. Both of these systems operate as separate business units and provide internationally accepted frameworks for the issuing of international IEC reports and certificates that can be used to facilitate global trade and product services while maintaining compliance, confidence in their compliance. My background is in electrical engineering, and I am stationed here at the IEC Sydney office, and work through in the conformity assessment area now for some 20 plus years. Collectively, IEC conformity assessment systems and schemes have issued well over 1 million certificates worldwide to organisations in over 100 countries. Our compliance schemes and systems work alongside standards development, as well as with many other national, regional and global organisations such as ISO, ILAC, IAF, OIML, UN, WTO and many others. And we thank you for the opportunity for IEC to be included in this important event.
Thank you, Chris. Can Bill introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. Bill Loizidis here. I'm the General Manager for Legal Metrology in Australia. I'm Australia's representative to the CIML. I'm also a member of the Presidential Council of the OIML and the Deputy Chair of the Single Certificate System of the IML, so the Type Approval System. And I'm accompanied today by Daryl Hines, who's my technical expert. I lead the regulatory side of the legal metrology framework in Australia, predominantly on the policy and regulatory position, ably assisted by Mr. Hines on the technical front. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So maybe Daryl, you can continue your introduction.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. As Bill alluded to, I'm here this afternoon just assisting him. I have 38 years experience in the legal metrology space, and my current role is Manager of Policy and Regulatory Services, which looks after the type approval, the licensing of third-party authorities, the measurement standards calibrations for trade applications, and also the policy and framework for documentary standards. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Daryl. Ms. Ethy, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. In my end, it's very, very early in the morning. I'm Etty Feller, ILAC Chair, and also the Israeli Laboratory Accreditation Authority General Manager.
Yeah, I can hear Etty.
Okay, so I have 20 years experience in the accreditation system and 15 more years in pharmaceutical companies in different roles, from the bench to a QC manager via R&D and startup session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Etty. And last but not least, we have a special guest here, Mike Glickman. It's pretty late in Washington, D.C. now. So, Mike, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon. It is evening here. It's almost midnight here, but I've enjoyed this. I have been in healthcare information technology for about 45 years now, and I've specialized in systems integration and interoperability in healthcare most of in fact, my entire career for the most part, other than teaching in college, has been involved in healthcare information technology. I'm currently chair of TC 215, been working, which is health informatics, and work with Leslie on the presentation that you saw, and we put the task force together to come to the conclusion that we would want to use UCOM for metrology and units and measure in healthcare. And thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So that's our distinguished panel of representing the speakers, except for, I suppose, Miss Feller here, who was speaking just now. So I would throw the forum to Victoria, who has curated the questions that you have posted on the chat. So thank you for posting those questions on the chat box, and Victoria will post them to our panelists. Victoria, please.
Thanks, Tom, and thank you to those of you who've posted questions. Just a reminder, you can still ask questions of the audience, and you can still vote for or raise the profile of the questions that have come through. Just to go back historically in the order of the talks, there was a question early on to Leslie and Mike from Blair Hall and MSL, and that is there much interest in metrological traceability in your work? And do you incorporate the notion of uncertainty and measurement error?
Yes, that's a great question, and indeed there is. And in traceability is very important, and in the testing that we do, and certification that we do, one of the things we look for in particularly electronic health record systems, where systems are used by clinicians all over the world, traceability is a very important part of it. And the uncertainty of measurement, we're not, I'll answer that. I saw that in the question. We don't focus on uncertainty per se, because it's hard for us to measure in healthcare. So we're more interested in what the proper values are for what it is that we're working with, as opposed to trying to assess the uncertainty.
That's great. Thanks for that, Mike. The next question would be for Chris on behalf of David. And this is also a question actually from Blair Hall and MSL. And at present, we ensure non-ongoing quality assurance that metrological traceability is correctly in place. And that's usually achieved by objective measurement comparisons of some kind or another. How does your vision of self-calibrating autonomous systems accommodate this fundamental part of what we now do?
Very interesting question.
Yes, it is.
And one that we need to approach with a very open mind. And we need to be clear and understand what we mean when we talk about calibration. We're talking about an internal calibration. We're talking about calibration with full traceability, which is, I think, what the question is aimed at. And as we go forward with this digital transformation, we're going to come across a number of challenges, and this is just one of many. And I do recall going back in 2003 now, which is about 18 years ago, we took steps in IEC, in the IECX system, to combat the issue of counterfeit and fake certificates that were circulating around the world by developing an electronic online certificate system, whereby the original certificate issued by bodies, the certification bodies, the CABs, was actually created live online and then presented live online. And that was the master version at a time when paper was the seen as the master. And that took a lot of convincing at the time, but now it's second nature. So I think this, along with many others, is just activities and aspects we're just going to have to keep an open mind at, and work very closely with all sectors of the community, the stakeholders, as well as industry. And just finally on this, we do work closely with our colleagues in the ILAC fraternity, especially when we deal with calibration and traceability of measurements, as well as our good friends and partners in the OIML. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chris. I've got another question for you actually, and that is, are there specific, this is from Brian Justice, and are there specific efforts to collaborate with industry to manufacture new products that lend themselves to these efforts? For example, calibration or machine readable data output, or for existing products to have firmware updates that have CIPM emulation modes that lend themselves to these efforts?
Yeah, absolutely, to work with industry. In fact, IEC, its origins date back well over 100 years when we started with IEC as a home of industry. And all of our committees, our activities, whether it be standards development or conformity assessment, we do have a large focus on working directly with industry and all stakeholders, regulators, through national representation. What I would say here, it's vital for industry to step up and participate in the various forums that we all have available, whether it be an IEC, whether it be the ILAC or OIML or ISO or any others. I think it's important that industry plays its role and works with all of the organisations. So yes, we certainly do plan to, and we currently do work very closely with industry. Thank you.
Thanks. And Chris, one more question for you. And this is from Juria in Nimti in Thailand. Do we need to transform old standards to digital standards? And is that going to be a drawback?
Yes, as we embrace all new technology, we do need to look at what we've been using in the past and what is it that we need to bring forward. How many times have we introduced new IT systems in our own organisations where all of a sudden we've got all this old legacy data that needs to be brought across as well? So the short answer to the question is yes, we will need to look at bringing across the older standards, but also remember that standards, by virtue of being a standard, is a living document. And they are subjected to continual updating and continual refinement. So I don't know that we're going to have a great deal of many older standards that will need to be updated as being suggested. So I don't see it as an obstacle in terms of a showstopper. It certainly is a task that we will need to address. But yes, we will need to bring those up to date as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Victoria, may I ask a follow-up question? And maybe I would like to pose this to all the panelists. So Chris mentioned about it's important to work with the industry. So my question to the panelists is, in the kind of digital transformation of your services or your capabilities and so on, who are some of your key stakeholders and that you're working with, and what kind of projects are you working with them? So maybe we can start with OIML.
Sorry, Chair, can you just repeat that a bit for me, please?
Yes, Chris was mentioning that it's important to work with industry. So my more general question to the whole panel is that in all the digital transformation projects and activities in transforming your services for the community and so on, who are your key stakeholders that you are working with, and what are the kind of projects that you are doing with them? I noticed that in the presentation, there's some that are futuristic, some that are perhaps already needed now. So what are the key stakeholders that are important to you in the digital transformation effort?
Well, obviously the end users, we try and reach consensus with, we call it on a tripartite system. So obviously the industry, as was mentioned earlier, we work with the regulators on our technical committees, but we also, in making determinations on what things we make recommendations for, we as economies go out to our constituents and ask, what do you need? For example, in Africa, they talk about we need health-based measurements, for example. In South America, they're looking at calibration type recommendations and type approval, what happens there. So it's a tripartite feedback that we receive to make determinations of what's coming over the horizon and how those recommendations can accommodate them.
Mm-hmm. Would I say this would be somewhat your traditional partners? Are there new partners that you are working with to enable the digitalization?
I think so. In the software space, there are recommendations in regard to that, but as innovation, electricity, it's the pathway that's important. And as regulators, for example, being able to be assured that something meets an outcome, that it's accurate or meets the requirements, and being able to check that all the way through, it's sort of like a blockchain analysis, is very important. So there are new people coming into it. Who is storing this data? Where is it being stored? What's the efficacy of that storage? And a couple of presenters have talked about that. So that's where these new industries, so to speak, are coming into our consideration.
Thank you. So, Etty, do you have anything to add? Who would you be?
Yes.
Who would be your key stakeholders working on the digital transformation?
Yes, I think that we as ILAC have, and as an AB, we have actually 4 areas that we will have, that we deal on a daily basis. As ILAC, we deal with the regions. The regions deal with ABs that are our signatories. And at the end of the day, the end users of accreditation are the CABs. For each one of them, there is an end user that we need to consult with. And I think that also we have to bear in mind that there are different areas. Someone mentioned the medical health. So it depends on the region. There are some regions that need more support and other work 100% electronic file, electronic messages with apps and so on. So the differences are really huge between different areas of accreditation. And I want to mention 2 other sectors that we work and mentioned yesterday in the plenary: the public sector and the businesses, global businesses. In both cases, we work with them, and we have 2 websites that we take part in order to publish case studies that show the benefit and the needs of the public sector and the businesses around the world. Last but not least, I mentioned the regulators. I think that we have to bear in mind that in different economies, the regulators work within the governments, and they are in some cases reluctant to bring on any new ideas or new ways of working. So when we work on any upgrade and digitalization, we have to bear in mind that by the end of the day, our governments that will have to use some of the information, part of their inspection of the market, have to be ready to get this information in a digital way. Thank you.
Thank you, Etty. Last but not least, Mike, what is your view?
Surely, thank you. Our users, the end users, if you will, are clinicians and administrators. The people that use electronic health record systems and all the other systems. We also have stakeholders that are, of course, our national member bodies. There's 63 countries that are part of TC 215, and of course the regulators at the table when we worked on the identification of additional products. I mentioned in the talk we had 9 countries represented for about 2 years while we were putting that all together, and of course we have the vendors, our stakeholders, and they are the EHR vendors, the laboratory vendors, pharmacy, radiology. There's vendors now that do contact centers and patient engagement and population health management. So they're all vendors and stakeholders as well. And of course, there's a whole domain of protocol-based clinical research. And one of the interesting projects, of course, that we're working on right now is the ability to report COVID testing. There's about 250 different kinds of tests that are done, and be able to report test results. And of course, now in the past two months, thank goodness, we're also putting together, a project where we're focused on vaccination reporting. So the first dose, the second dose, who the vendor is, what kind of vaccination was done, how it was administered. So that's an interesting project, and obviously very real time, because we want to be able to report not only how many people have and haven't had vaccinations and where they stand in the regimen, but there's going to be boosters coming along. And of course, we want to be able to report adverse events. So very interesting area, and obviously quite timely and important.
Thank you, Mike. I think at this point, I would also want to pose you a question that was put up by Simon Cox, right? When I was asking who are some of your stakeholders that you're working with, I think in the context of digitalization and so on, there's a lot of work done out there by different, industry, organization, and so on, particularly in the effort in digitizing the units of measure, right? So I think in your presentation somewhere in ICE, you mentioned the work that you're doing with UCOM. Are they other specific, do you have a formal relationship with UCOM? ISO has a formal relationship with UCOM?
Well, they are, yes, they're members of the committee. They were also involved in the task force that we put together and provided input on that. And, another coding scheme that's used is LOINC, which is laboratory observations. It too was developed at Regenstrife, which is where UCOM came from. So yes, they're part of the group. And, when we need new values or new codes, we have a process for, submitting those and making sure that they come back consistent with what's been done in the past. And the same is true with the SNOMED coding schemes that are used for clinical terminology. So, and it's interesting if you just think about, so UCOM is there for the quantities and units, but there's totally different standards for a physician ordering a drug versus the fulfillment function, which is the pharmacy fulfilling that drug order. So, for example, the pharmacist is very worried about how many tablets come in a package, and the ordering physician only cares about what the drug is and what the strength is. So it's very interesting, the different domains, and of course they have to interact properly. And if we're using this, consistent units and measures, that's we don't stand a chance without that.
Yeah, thank you. So I heard that we need to work with certain domain organizational experts that can give us the right requirement for what we need to do. Thank you.
Exactly.
Victoria?
Thanks, Tom. Another question from the floor from Mark Custer to Roman, I guess in this case to Bill and Daryl. And that's, does the digital instrument representation vision include mathematical models of instrument behaviour?
It's very likely that it will in the future, but at this point in time, it's going to need some real deep thinking in terms of the algorithms to be able to make sure that that modelling is going to be fit for purpose to make those assessments. So I think we've got to be very cautious and make sure we don't, put anything off the table. But I think that's a long-term vision that we would be looking for. Whether that happens in the next 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, I think it's certainly on the table.
Great, thanks, Daryl. Another one from the floor, also from Blair Hall from MSL, directed to, I guess, Daryl and Bill again. And that's, with the development of a legal metrology infrastructure apparently so far developed, how much flexibility is there in those systems to adapt to changes that may emerge as digital technology advances? For example, have assumptions been made about core SI representations, and is it easy to change those assumptions?
Thank you, Victoria. What a fantastic question. The answer is no, in a nutshell. However, let me elaborate. Law has always played a game catching up to innovation. And as Eddie said, at the end of the day, it's the client, it's the stakeholder, and the laws are there to protect and or provide advice, whether it be scientific or legal. And a number of economies around the world are grappling with this exact issue, because the laws in a number of economies now, including in Australia, is very prescriptive. And what we are doing now across the world, we're all looking at each other and writing the law in a way that it's called outcome or principle based. And that is meant to say, that doesn't matter if the type approval or the certification process or the CTT processes are in place. At the end of the day, you want the thing that you're trying to regulate to either be accurate, to work the way it's meant to be. So a number of economies are working towards reshaping their laws, and there's a number in our own region doing that, Australia also being part of that, to try and encompass the innovation that's occurring while still allowing the scientific traceability to the SI units and allowing the manufacturers or industry to make their instruments, getting it to market as quickly as possible, and still meeting the consumers' outcomes that it's accurate, I'm getting what I'm paying for, or there's a level playing field, or wherever it might be. Hope that answers it, Chair.
Yeah, that's great. It's certainly very complicated to turn these ships around. Another one for the legal for OIML, and this is from Philip Mitchell from NMIA, and he asks, how will digital metrology and a digital representation assist with compliance monitoring?
It's going to be very, very important by having measuring instruments that are being used for trade connected digitally. Provides us, instantaneous information to be able to identify faults. We can also use that information to be able to, identify trends with particular instruments, identify areas where we may need to have a greater regulatory presence, where we may be able to pull back in terms of the regulatory activity. So from that compliance activity, having access to that data, having access to the history and the calibration data, the verification data over a prolonged period of time, allows regulators to be able to use their resources more effectively to target areas of high risk. And that's where we can really embrace all of that information to be able to do our roles better. And it can also be used in terms of policy development for the future as well, based on that historical data and the increased value of that data that we will have access to.
Great, thanks, Daryl. One more specific question, I guess, before we can revert to more general questions, and this one is directed to Etty. It's from Daniel. His question is, the web pages with the use cases that you presented were very interesting to see your needs and the lessons learned from your stakeholders. Do you also have any cases written about digital transformation that you can include?
all case studies that we publish in both pages in the public sector and business benefits are those that we get from ABs and or from CAPS. Some of them mention digitalization, but right now I cannot say that we have an area that deal only with digitalization. I want to echo what was said previously. There are some countries that work in high percentage with their stakeholders, business and import-export database, 100% digital information. And they went through confidentiality and business information about clients and so on. But the gaps between countries or economies around the world is quite huge right now. And this is the reason why I said, if you have any more examples, please send it out to me if you wish, and we can share them with all other people around the world. All the information about those two sites are in my presentation that I gave yesterday in the plenary. And I've just asked the Secretariat, all the presentations and the record will be available later on the BIPM website. So you will have an access to them as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Etty. That's great. Tom, maybe I think you're on mute, Tom.
Thank you, Victoria. Can I ask a more general question to the panel again? We heard Roman Schwartz talk about the metrology cloud, and then some of the autonomous things that machine will be doing in the future. I suppose we already see some of those happening now in autonomous vehicle, drones, and some of those AI applications that is already out there in the digital world. So my question to the panel is that as part of the quality infrastructure, and with many economies being a member of this international quality infrastructure, what are some of the skill sets that might be needed in the future to be successful in transforming their organization, right, to be able to service and perform things in this new digital world? So maybe we can start with IEC, Chris.
Yes, certainly, Chair. Very good question. And I think it also too provides a very good segue. I see a question there regarding relating to when can we expect to see first implementation of digital transformation in quality infrastructure. And I think we must remember that digital transformation is nothing new. We've all been doing this over a number of years. And if you look at the way we used to work in the quality infrastructure, whether it be development of standards, whether it be testing and certification, approvals and the like, we started, for example, communicating with letters. We would send letters by mail. You would expect them to take about a week or two to get there. You'd expect, you'd say, okay, they need about 5 days to a week to consider the item, then they need to send it back. So I don't expect a response for about a month. That was back then. Then those of us that are old enough to remember the advent of the fax machines when they first came to life, and we thought how wonderful that was. And then we moved from fax machines to emails, sending emails. And now in more recent times, it's more download. Things are available and you just download them when you need them. So we've been on this journey for quite some time. And in terms of the quality infrastructure and what sort of skill set, my line of thinking is, after being involved in this for so many years, is that the first skill set we need is for people to have open minds and look at Okay, I need to be open about this new technology and how it can help me. The second thing I think we also need to be cognizant of is that digital transformation is not the solution. It's a tool. It's a tool for us to get things done. And we found this more so in IEC, in our conformity assessment, when we moved to this electronic online certificate, the issuing of online certificates, which meant no more paper. Now, that was introduced as a tool to address the problem we were finding of counterfeit certificates floating around the market. But that still did not take away the need for IEC and our systems to address the issues of compliance. So I think two key things there we need. We need open minds, but we also need to understand that digital transformation is not a solution. It's a tool that we need to work with. And if we can approach digital transformation with those attributes, I think we can certainly achieve great things. Thank you.
Thank you. So can I hear the view of Bill?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be very honest with you all. It's money to implement these things. You know, to transfer, as Chris just said, you went from letters to fax machines to computers. That all takes capital. So, and I'm not sure about other economies, but you know, you have finite resources, and then being able to apply those resources in a manner that gets you the most effect in this digital, whatever the digital transformation is. Second, it's the skill set. So we still need the professionals to be able to assess the conformity, the type approval material. However, they now have to be buddied up with the IT skills to be able to lead and make it effective. So the skill set slightly changes as well. So to implement that quality infrastructure as we go forward. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Daryl, you have anything to add?
No, I really fully support what Chris was saying. I think one of the most important tools is having that open mind and making sure from a regulator's perspective, we don't stifle innovation. And it's looking at that fit for purpose outcomes in the objective.
Okay, thank you. Effie, how does ILEC look at this?
I want to give some other point of view that doesn't relate directly to ILAC, but all of us around the world face it through the last year. We spoke about money, open-minded, in the box, out of the box, but we have to bear in mind also that there are some labor laws and labor acts around the world, and the skills of those that may or want or need to use this information. And in one of the countries, or actually 3 countries now, mentioned that although they want to send a certificate with a QR code in order to make sure that to the security and the confidentiality, the government is not cooperate with this new way because of skills of those that want or need to use this certificate, as well as the scope of their work. They are afraid that it will reduce the numbers of social servants and the need of those regulators, and it will affect the numbers of employees in these regulated areas. And I just want to echo what Chris says. Digitalization, it's not new. 20 years ago, we submit electronics files with accredited certificates when we want to sign a new drug application. The last year, only show all of us around the world that we have to think in another way. We cannot rely only on papers and on face-to-face meetings and so on. And this is the reason why we are all today in this meeting virtually. Okay, this is one of the effects. Thank you.
Thank you. Indeed, I think the pandemic has hastened some areas of digital transformation, like what we are doing now. In some cases, we are making do with whatever technology that we have and try to use it. And I'm sure over time, there'll be improvement in such technology. But in some cases, the technology is ahead of us. Mike, what is your view on this?
Well, thanks for asking. I'm going to take a slightly different slice at this. And I'll start by saying I agree that digital transformation has been around for a long time. And I think what's different now is the ubiquity of the systems and the complexity of the system. So you ask about skill sets, and I think that a very important skill that's going to be required is that of associated with break, fix, and triage. So if you think about these systems, as you put more and more systems together, you don't want to be the weakest link in the chain or the slowest ship in a convoy. You want to put them together and make sure that they work well. And what's going to happen is that the skill set that's required to triage a problem, we all know it. Everything's great. When we see it with all of these virtual meetings, everything's great when it's all working. But if you don't have a Benjamin around, we wouldn't be talking as smoothly as we are right now. So the skill set is the break, fix, and triage when things don't work well. And what happens is, yes, it works well 80, 95% of the time. But boy, when it isn't working, it's just a nightmare. And sometimes, you think about healthcare. If we have a ransomware attack in the U.S., what's happened because we're so busy in ignoring our infrastructure that we've had entire hospitals shut down, operating rooms not able to work, and people have to be transferred because the computer systems aren't available. So it's just the skills are going to be to again, it's easy when everything's working, but when it's not, to get back to a working state quickly. That's going to turn out to be a far more unique skill that we have right now. And then the other part of it is that the whole idea of machine learning, when you do this conformance testing and you have determinism where a given set of inputs, you have an output. When the machine starts learning and the outputs start changing for the same inputs, how do you test that? What are the conformity assessment criteria that go with that? I think it's a very difficult problem, and it's a whole nother skill set.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's somewhat come with the territory. Yeah? As technology advances, there are new complexity being introduced. But sometimes it might not be the complexity, but it's just a new technology that we would have to learn. So I always use the joke that in the old days, we want to make a DVD player that the grandfather or grandmother can use, right, with no instruction and so on. But I think over time, we are beginning to, feel like grandfather or grandmother when our kids are doing things that we could not do, right? But that's because of the change in technology. Yeah, sure. So I think there's reskilling needed.
They're showing us how to use it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, back to you, Victoria. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. So I think we've also kind of touched on Jaria's question, but another question has popped in from Ray Pia, which is, when can we expect to see digital calibration reports from NMIs? Which is possibly a question for the metrologists in the room, I suppose. Yeah, but I'm not sure that, I guess from a personal perspective on that, I'm not sure that there'll be a green light per se when it necessarily transitions all at once. So it should, it should be a slow infiltration, I guess, as with many of these technologies.
Yeah, I think this is a work in progress. Part of the workshop here is basically to discuss that particular topic and area, and how different stakeholders and different skill sets can be brought together to enable that digital calibration report or certificate. I think we can see when digitalization is used in a proper way, it gives us a lot of benefits, but there's also challenges that is associated with implementing it. That's where we are here today, discussing some of the exciting vision and also maybe challenges that we face. Some could be as simple as what FD has mentioned, to keep jobs, so you don't want to rush that process. Okay, thank you. Victoria, do we have any more questions?
I think we've come to the end of the questions for our moderators, for our panel.
Yes. Thank you. So I think let me first thank our distinguished panels here, so willingly answered so many questions, and also our audience here posting interesting questions for our panel, and the panelists are standing in for the colleagues who are in a different time zone, presenting the materials and answering the question. Thank you very much. So with that, I think this is the end of today's session. We covered 2 topics. Tomorrow we will have 3 more topics. Let me see. I think we would have one that is covering the RMO, their effort and activities in digital transformation. And we also hear from the industry digital infrastructure, what they are doing, as well as a maybe more slightly technical slant in the last topic in digital representation of the unit. So we look forward to you joining us again tomorrow, same time, for the 3 topics. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming online, attending this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Goodbye.